Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. In a moment, I'm going to introduce my two esteemed panelists that are with me. But first, my name is Evan Stone. I am one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Educators for Excellence. I am a former sixth grade teacher, and I left the classroom now almost 9 years ago and helped lead and build Educators for Excellence over the last decade. Educators for Excellence, in brief, is a teacher-led movement trying to drive change on behalf of our students in classrooms across the country and within our teachers' unions. We are almost 35,000 members strong across the country. And as an organization, we believe fundamentally in the importance of our unions as a lever for change on behalf of students and the teaching profession. So in the conversation today, we're going to be digging into the role of unions and what teachers want their unions to do, both during and after this pandemic. As you all know who are joining us, 2020, this school year, has been unlike any other. You've heard that in other conversations throughout this really awesome online conference. And one of the things that we think a lot about is during this epidemic and pandemic, we have seen a real abdication of leadership at the federal level, leaving lots of decisions of education up to local conversations. And as a result, we've had a patchwork of decision-making occurring at the local level. And that's led to, in our perspective, increases in inequity, a lack of focus on instructional quality, a lack of distribution of technology for students, and more than anything, real chaos that's damaged kids' learning and frustrated teachers across the country. It has also created a lot of space for unions to lean on their political power and their bargaining authority at the local level to help establish the rules for the road, for what distance learning would look like, for what reopening conversations would look like. And while we think it is critical that unions have an influential voice in their local landscape, we also think they have an obligation to fight for the interests of their students and to elevate the teaching profession. And we know at E4E that teachers want to see bolder, more student-focused leadership from their unions. Educators for Excellence does a national representative teacher survey. And last year it showed us that only 21% of teachers believe their union does an excellent job advocating for policies that are in the best interest of students, while 58% of teachers said that it was critically important for unions to focus on that issue. And so there's clearly a gap between what teachers want their union to be doing and what they see them doing right now. And as a result of that at E4E, we have seen educators begin to run for union leadership across the country, to demand more of their leaders and to push their unions to be stronger. And I am joined by two such visionary educators. They're terrific student-focused leaders, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to Marisa Crabtree and Gabriel Serrano. Let me see if I can go to the next slide. Here is a slide that both shows their name and their titles, but I'll give them a second to introduce themselves. But it also lays out the priorities of the union slate that they ran on in Los Angeles when they tried to push UTLA to be more focused on the voices of teachers and advocating for students within their union. So with that, Gabe, Marisa, this spring you ran together for a slate of leadership seats within one of the largest teachers unions in the world, the second largest teachers union in the country. Could you start by sharing a little bit about your background, what made you decide to run for union leadership, and a little bit about your sort of platform or vision for UTLA? Marisa, maybe we can start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marisa Crabtree, and I'm actually a high school English teacher in Los Angeles. I've been a teacher of 9th through 12th grade students and students from, recent arrivals in the country who are just learning English as a second language to students who are advanced placement students who are honor students. So I've taught all levels of high school students, and I've taught every grade level, 9th through 12th. I've been in the classroom for 15 years. I love being a teacher, and it was a really hard decision to actually decide to run for union leadership because I knew that it would be a full-time position and giving up my time in my classroom and my time in front of students. And that was like a really big sacrifice to consider making. So I want to kind of go off of that idea. One of the reasons that I chose to run for union leadership was because I felt like the really day-to-day kind of nuts and bolts concerns of teachers and students in schools where it was really getting lost in a lot of politicizing of decisions and a lot of giving a lot of, it was lost in the current leadership of UTLA, who gives a lot of voice to some of these concerns, but then doesn't really follow through with action. And I really wanted a union that was going to address some of these issues. I wanted a union that would see that the students with the highest needs were the ones that were getting the most resources. And I wanted a union that would really take teacher voice and use that to craft a vision for the future and really turn LA Unified and LA teachers into the cutting edge of education, which I believe is where LA should be. We should be on the cutting edge. And so that was really my vision and part of our platform for why we ran for union leadership. It's nice to see everybody and to have you here, and I'm excited to talk to you more about our journey.
Great, thank you, Marisa. Gabe, do you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of an understanding of why you ran for UTLA leadership?
Sure, thank you, Evan. Thank you, Marisa. Well, I'm a current elementary teacher. I teach special education, the primary grades, so I teach the tiniest humans. And, I'm a former high school teacher, but since coming to elementary, I've fallen in love with the profession even more so. So I think this is where I'm going to stay. And so just to relate to what Marisa said, it was tough for me as well to decide to run because it would become a full-time job if I was elected. And that was a huge struggle for me. But for me, I have this sense of urgency that I take with me in my profession, and that's to make sure that I'm serving, that we are in our profession serving the students that need it the most. And so that's where I saw myself as my role in the union is I want to make sure that we are guiding our union to serving students who do need it the most. And I wanted to see, when I first got involved with the union, it's because I felt that special ed teachers did not have a very strong voice in their union. And I'd like to be the best advocate I can possibly be. And I saw the need for a special education voice in our union leadership. And so with that, I felt, this is a great opportunity to get that word out there, whether we win the election or not. I wanted to run, and I want to get that message out there that we need more membership engagement so that we can elevate teacher voice in our union. And all that is to empower our union so that we could use our leverage as a powerful union to best advocate for the needs of our students. And so that's why I decided to get involved and run. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I've been inspired by you for a long time. And though you weren't successful in winning your 2 seats as a president and vice president in the second largest teachers union, you did really reframe the dialogue about what's possible for unions. And you created a movement of teachers who share those beliefs in UTLA and actually across the country as well. And I think against steep odds, you gained a lot of traction and demonstrated that teachers are hungry for a different vision from their leadership. It's something we see in our polling across the country. Another interesting stat that I constantly think about is only 37% of teachers said they hear a great deal from their union leadership. So they feel disconnected, they don't feel engaged. This came out in your election, which I think there was less than 20% of teachers who voted. So knowing that, what do you see as the most important lingering challenges for UTLA? What do they need to do to better represent teachers, to better serve students, to better serve the community in our current educational reality?
So I'll start with my answer to this question. So I think that, first of all, like Evan just pointed out, we saw really low member engagement with even what was a member-wide election where every UTLA member can vote. And we saw that it was less than 20% of members who voted to elect their leadership. And so that's just a symbol of how, what little engagement we have. And I think that part of that is because there's a lot of opacity and just like murkiness around the rules and around the election procedures and around the guidelines for just voting even. And so I think one problem is that voting is really challenging for people, and there's just a lot of a lack of engagement because it's too difficult, it's too hard, there are too many barriers put into place. I also think that another thing that UTLA needs to look at doing is welcoming diverse perspectives, and I mean diverse perspectives from different levels of schooling, you know, everybody from the early childhood educators to, you know, teachers who are teaching seniors in high school or college students. I think that our union needs to accept perspectives from those different levels, but then also from teachers who have different years of experience and from teachers of different genders and racial backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. I think we need to look at just increasing diversity and having more people's voices heard in our union decision making. And then the last thing is that there's been this real polarization that's happened the last several years where if you disagree with the group of the union that's in power currently, if you disagree with them, you're kind of demonized, you're painted as being a villain. You know, there's a lot of like loaded language and loaded words that are used. And I think that, you know, we're all educated professionals and all of us care, I mean, most of us care about our kids and care about our schools. And so to kind of demonize and villainize us, it's just kind of like, meant that the chasm between the current leadership and everyday, like normal, you know, in the trenches teachers has kind of widened. I don't know that that the current leadership who've been out of the classroom for several years, that they really maybe understand or remember the day-to-day, you know, business of actually being a classroom educator. And so I think that's another problem, that our differences and what we believe are different solutions to problems, and that could be a strength, but it's actually been turned into, you know, a major kind of like dividing line rather than being seen as a strength. And I think that's been a real flaw and something that UTLA needs to work on to be stronger.
Great. And it looks like we may have lost Gabe for a second, so I'll let him log back in. And Marisa, I'll just keep chatting with you. So you guys ran on a really amazing platform. You had sort of 4 objectives, one of which was to make the union more collaborative. One of them was to make the union more student focused, but another one of them was to make the union more diverse and anti-racist. And this has been a key topic that people have been talking about across the country. How do we make sure our schools and our systems serve all students regardless of their race and background? So I'd love to know what are the most important changes you could see the union embrace to sort of break down systemic racism within its own institution, as well as within the schools, particularly in this era of COVID.
So one thing that I think has happened with the union is that we tend to, you know, we tend to look at institutions and kind of point fingers at other players in education and say, you know, it's their fault. You know, it's other people's fault, or it's other groups' fault, it's other institutions' fault. And I think that that kind of misrepresents the problem. I would really like to see more leadership from UTLA in pushing us to look internally and to really have teachers take some time to really be thoughtful and reflective about our own biases. I know that I'm not a teacher of color. You know, I'm white, and so, you know, I need to do some work, and I need to like really do some thoughtful kind of consideration of how, you know, I can be an ally to people of color, and how as a teacher in a classroom where most of my students are children of color, how I really need to be careful and to be strategic and to really do some, you know, put in the hard work and the time to really dig in and think about like how I can turn my classroom into a classroom of allyship. And so I think that it's really important that our union kind of leads the way on that, and that our union really encourages every teacher in the union to kind of take some time and take a look at that. I think, and I know Gabriel's coming back on, so I'm just going to say one more thing. Like, I think that that we also need to look at the intersectionality of students and just consider that. And I think this is another way that our union could really encourage teachers to be leaders on this issue. That just like looking at how it's not just that we have students of color in our classroom, but we also have students of color who come from low income backgrounds, and we have students of color who you know, who might also be LGBTQ students or identify that way. So we have a lot of students who have these intersectional identities, and I think another thing that the union needs to really help teachers lead the way on and kind of foster within teachers is this understanding of intersectional identities and how we need to like see that kind of play, how we need to understand how that could play out in our classrooms or in our schools. So I think those two things I would say are really important for the union to lead on. Welcome back, Gabe.
Welcome back, Gabe. This is a common theme that I hear from you, Marisa, a lot, which is about, you know, on issues of professionalism, on issues of justice, we need our union to lead, to not point fingers, to not always place blame, like to call people out when they're not doing their part. But as a professional union, we should be representing the profession and pushing ourselves to be better as teachers. Gabe, we're talking about how to make the union sort of more anti-racist and more focused on racial justice issues. For you specifically, what does this look like during COVID? Like, do you have any specific examples of what you wish the union had done differently to support high quality learning opportunities during this really, really difficult time?
Well, you know, I felt that as soon as the pandemic hit, it was definitely a very big scramble for all of us to try to think of what we can do to continue serving our students. And I feel like a lot of the voices that went into planning what comes next, over the summer, where we're taking our professional development and trainings, I don't feel like there was a lot of teacher voice in there. A lot of actual, frontline teacher from the classrooms in the trenches voice. And I feel like that's something that should have been really considered. I feel like that we were thrown a whole lot of resources, but we didn't have a strong teacher voice vetting these resources to kind of narrow the scope and say, this is what we found has been effective. Try this out, because it was honestly a lot. It was a lot that we were given, and it's overwhelming, and sometimes it is it is detrimental to have too much. It's not like it's not like like I used to say about cologne when I was a teenager, where too much is never enough. This is something where if teachers had been there, frontline teachers had been there to vet the resources, we could have hit the ground running so much more efficiently when the school year started.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys talked a lot about in your campaign was about the distance that sometimes union leadership has from membership. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how do you wish that the union did a better job of like truly representing frontline teachers' perspectives? What could they be doing, particularly now that we're all virtual in Los Angeles? What could the union be doing to better represent teachers so that they could collaborate with the district and play that professional vetting role?
Well, just the memory I want to share from our strike. When our strike ended and we needed to take a vote as a body, it was very easy for our union members, our union leadership, to get that vote, to get that teacher input. It's very easy for them to get the output to everyone, and when they needed it, to get that input from the teachers and from the members, from all the members. And I just feel like that same effort wasn't applied to our election. And I do want our union to be more democratic, and that's going to take more membership outreach, more membership engagement. Right? We had almost every teacher vote to end the strike. However, only, like what we mentioned before, 20% or even less than 20% voted in our election. And I remember one little story I had during my phone banking, where I was calling to say, hey, we have the slate, we're running for union leadership, and several people responded back, does the union know about this? Well, of course the union knows about this. This is something we go through every year. This is part of our democratic process. And I think the idea is that does our one party know about this? Does the current leadership know about this? That's what our members see as the union. And I've tried to spread the idea within our membership that we are the union. We are all the union. And if we want our voice to be heard, we have to take some action there. And I think union leadership can do a better job in facilitating this, and that this would be one of the best ways to get us through the COVID crisis, get us through the reckoning with racial justice in the United States, and any other issues that may come up in the future. We need our teacher voices heard.
That's, you're speaking my language there. That is certainly the mission that we're about. Marisa, I'd love to know from you, like, when you think about what both LAUSD, for everybody that doesn't know, Los Angeles is still fully virtual at this point and has been for the full year. What do you wish the district or the union were doing or collaborating on that would help you serve your students better or help your school adapt to this?
So I know that the union came to be under an industrial model, and I think it's really time to transition from that model to a more personalized and tailored approach. And this is where I think the district, or I think actually the union working together with the district, could really move into the 21st century and take more of a lead on transitioning back to the classroom. We have students who, like I spoke to before, students who are high needs, or students who really would benefit from, I think, being back at the school site in a healthy way with, of course, healthy precautions put into place. And I think that it's important for us to start to talk about how do we get those groups of students that are the highest need populations back onto campus. And I'm talking about, students with disabilities, students who do not have stable homes, unhomed students. I'm talking about students who are learning English, who just arrived in the country or arrived in the last few years and really need, really need help and direct instruction with their English skills. And I'm talking about our little students, our little guys, our youngest little babies who really can't, learn at home without an adult next to them, and they still need that, those people who are there with them. And I think it's time for us to really seriously sit down and start to talk about, can we have some groups of students safely return to campus? Which groups really we should prioritize? And how do we kind of make this transition safely? But, those are the students who are falling through the cracks. So the kids who are, getting multiple Fs in classes, the kids who are not getting their credits in line to graduate. I mean, probably many of them come from those groups, or maybe they even are those groups overlapping, right? They have those qualities that, again, those intersectional identities. And so I just think it's really important that we start to look at how can we personalize this? How can we tailor it so that the kids with the highest needs are able to go back in the classroom and teachers are there to welcome them.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And we've seen, Randy Weingarten recently just wrote an op-ed calling for schools to reopen for our neediest populations in New York City. The schools are reopening for elementary students who are already enrolled, or homeless students, or students with special needs. What do you think the barrier is? There's been so much fighting between the district and the union around this. For either of you, what do you think the barrier has been for both sides to come together around a shared set of interests of how do we create a safe working condition that also allows students to come back to school?
I feel like one of the barriers has just been our history, our combative history between our union and our district. And I feel like it's time to be a lot more collaborative and cooperative. We'll fight the fight when we absolutely need to fight the fight. And I'm going to steal this from Marisa, so sorry, Marisa, but we don't always need a hammer to solve a situation. Sometimes we need a screwdriver.
Marisa, what do you think? I would agree, and I love that analogy. Thank you, Gabe. But I also think that, I think money does get in the way. I'm just going to say it straight. It's like the elephant in the room. I know that it's like that equipping classrooms and equipping schools so that we're ready to go back safely is going to require funding. I think that is part of it. But I also think that, there's been a lot of fear. And like I spoke earlier about the polarization and the loaded language that's often used when people disagree, I think that actually applies to this situation too. When we start to discuss going back to the classroom, you have people who, just kind of, they kind of adopt their position, and then they use really loaded language, and they use a lot of fear tactics like, well, I don't want to die from going back to my classroom and getting COVID and all of that. I mean, I think again, there's just if you're of the group that doesn't align with the leadership of UTLA, you find yourself like kind of being painted in this corner of, you know, like threatening the health of all teachers. And so I agree. I think that there needs to be some kind of smoothing of the way. I think there needs to be like, you know, task force of teachers and administrators and, you know, district personnel and union leadership that kind of is meeting together to really look like consistently every week, probably, to really look at what do we honestly need to do to make in-person school possible for the kids who need it the most.
Yeah, I think the sort of one size fits all sort of all or nothing approach has been a real challenge. So that really resonates to me. And it should be a collaborative process. This is a very difficult problem to solve, but it's also one that I am confident the district and the union could solve together. So we know this has been really challenging, teaching during this pandemic. We know there's been a lot of vitriol and a lot of strong language. We also know that it's been really hard for students, and many students have been disengaged from school or less engaged in school. But I've also heard about some really like incredible innovations, some things that hopefully we'll be able to bring back after distance learning to our classrooms to differentiate instruction or improve instruction. What are you taking from this that you're hopeful next year or whenever Los Angeles comes back into classrooms? What are you taking from the pandemic and hopefully we'll be able to use in your schools or your buildings that you think is going to make you a better teacher?
Well, one thing that surprised me with some of my students actually have done pretty well. I would say, well, I mean, I got a small classroom because I'm a special ed teacher, but I could think of 2 students in particular who have actually done really well during this pandemic because for them being in a smaller situation works much better. And so how much smaller can you get than by yourself on a laptop? So that's a lot less stressful for them. You know, but these are very specific stories. This is not, I know this is not general to most students, but just to get myself more acquainted with technology and all the excitement around some of the new resources we have that I feel I could bring to the classroom. Such as using some online platforms that I had never really used before. You know, it'll be a new way to do something like a blended classroom. You know, where we'll have some students doing their research throughout the day in the class. You know, when doing research projects, and I'm really excited about going to the classroom and with the new resources that we've developed and new skills and strategies that we've developed during the pandemic, you know, and that will be a silver lining on a very, very gray cloud.
Absolutely. Marisa, what about you? What are you taking from this that you want to bring back or that you want the district or the union to advocate for?
So I think it's time that we all work together to advocate for universal low-cost Wi-Fi for every family in the United States of America. I think now we understand why that's important, and we need to be ready for the next time, right? And so, you know, just like we thought every household needed a phone, you know, in the 20th century, and we worked to provide phone lines to every single household, we need to do that for Wi-Fi now. Wi-Fi is like the new phone lines. And I honestly think that this helps inner city students, but it also helps students in rural areas. I know that I've been reading online and keeping up with things that are happening in other school districts too. And I know a lot of rural districts really struggle with having students who just don't even have Wi-Fi access and just can't access virtual learning at all. So, I mean, I definitely think I'm ready for that to happen. And I hope that everyone, every group, government, district, school, everyone can work, teachers union can work together to make that happen because it's time for it to happen. I also think that one of the things I've enjoyed is having assessment technology that gives you immediate results. We were already working towards this, and we were already kind of starting to use these assessment tools in our classroom, but now they've become so important. And so I just hope that we continue to refine testing technology and assessment platforms so that we continue to have like real-time results, and that we can get those results just like immediately after students have been assessed. And then the other thing I would say is that I think that every family who cannot afford a Wi-Fi every family who cannot afford a laptop, sorry, I was on my Wi-Fi thing earlier, but every family that cannot afford a laptop or an iPad, I think we now need to recognize that we have to provide families with a device. And I know there are lots of families across the country who can't afford them. Chromebooks are not that expensive. You can at least buy a Chromebook, but we also have families who can't afford devices. And I think that schools need to stand in the gap, and government needs to figure out a way to fund the gap, right? To fund families that are in that gap. And we need to close the technology gap that we now know exists.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have seen across both parties a clear realization that the idea of a one-to-one ratio is now essential for learning, and that access to Wi-Fi is a fundamental, a right in many ways for students. If education is a fundamental right, right now education is happening online, and so that would make Wi-Fi also a fundamental right. So I want to encourage people to put in questions. These are two amazing teacher leaders who are leaders in their union and have run for the president and vice president positions. So if you have questions for them, please add them. If not, I will keep asking mine because I have tons. So the other thing is, Gabe, you told a story about two kids that are doing great, but we also know there are many that are really struggling in this moment. We're thinking a lot about so what's next? If you were leading your union, what would you be fighting for to help with learning loss recovery? What should the union's position be on what needs to happen to help make up for the gaps that we know have grown during this pandemic, and to ensure we don't have a sort of generational issue from this crisis?
Well, I know in the past few years, being a special ed teacher, I've seen, and teaching in an extended school year, or what we've known as summer school in our generation, for the past few years, there's been a trend to kind of narrow the group that gets to go to extended school year, that has access to that. And I think we need to, especially to make up for what's happened in this past year, is to reopen that up and have a more universally offered extended school year, right? And to expand after school tutoring, and to promote ways for teachers to engage in that, because we can have burnout ourselves, and so we need to find ways to attract the best people to these resources, to do that extra tutoring, to work in the extended school year in order to best kind of mitigate the slide back that we had, not only in the regular school, in the in a regular situation during the summer, we would have some slide back, but now with what's going on with the pandemic, we definitely need to look forward and expand extended school year available to more students, not just those who have traditionally gotten it, maybe not even just special ed students, also general education students who definitely need it. I hear out there's some school districts where we might see that every student is getting an individualized education plan. I personally love that idea. That's
great. Marisa, what about you? If you had one union presidency, what would you be telling the district we need to do to make up for the lost learning?
So I'm going to kind of build off of what Gabe just talked about, and talk about, from a high school teacher perspective, we talk in the language of credits. And so the credits that students gather as they pass classes is what actually means that they can graduate from high school, right? They have to have a minimum number of credits, and those credits have to be from certain classes. I think most of us know how that works. And so credits are really that kind of that measuring stick that we use to look at students and if they're graduation ready or if they're on track for graduation. I think we're going to have a lot of students who have lost credits, who haven't passed classes and therefore are behind in credits and therefore aren't on track to graduate. And so I think that we're going to need to come up with ways of giving students opportunities to earn fast track credits. So that could be really, condensing a semester of learning into a week or 2 weeks. But I think that that's something that we're going to need to look at doing. Maybe you go to a class 7 days in a row for 6 or 7 hours a day, and then you can make up the credit in that class. I think also there might need to be more forgiveness, more allowance for students to make up work that they might have missed in a class because of technical difficulties. So there might need to be more forgiving use of incompletes where a kid can still have an extra month or at 3 weeks past the end of the semester to still turn work in and to still pass the class. So those are two things I can think of that might be things we need to look at doing in order to make sure students are still on a graduation track.
Yeah, both of those things really resonate with me. Like, it's going to be hard to make up for lost learning time if we don't add time. And also, it's not about saying lowering the bar. It's about saying, how do we provide other ways to demonstrate students are getting to the point that they're ready for graduation, so college or careers. And so I do think it is, what are innovative ways to make our classes accessible and available for students to demonstrate work? We have a great question that just came in, and it's making me think about, we've seen stats across the country that 15–20% of teachers say that this pandemic and the fear that they felt through it has made them more likely to leave the workforce. Luckily, we haven't seen massive waves of retirement yet, but that is a real risk, Gabe, to the burnout point that you said. And so the question is, we've also seen a real decrease in enrollment in our schools of education. What do you think we need to do to draw more students into the teaching profession? Should states be doing something? Do unions have a role in that? How can we, make teaching the most desired career path for our next generation of students? Gabe, I think you might be on mute.
There we go. Well, that's the quote of the year, isn't it?
I know you don't have it. It's not a video conference call without at least one time.
Yeah. And I think that really goes along with one of our messages during our campaign was, we want to elevate the teaching profession. We want to show that this is something that's, we are professionals. This is a career path, and we want to be, we want to be seen as such. We want to hold that respect as professionals. And in order to do that, we need to attract the best people to our profession. And I've always felt that way, that we need to do what we can to attract the best to our profession. And that one thing I think about is, with some of the programs out there, some great teaching programs out there, but the amount of debt that some of us have to go into in order to become teachers doesn't really match up with the pay that we end up getting as teachers. And so that is not so much about, I think we need to get more and more money just because I want a higher wage or I want a higher salary. That has to do with attracting the best people to our profession. And I'm not saying so much that we need to have, we did like double a teacher's salary. I mean, that would be great, right? But also, what resources are we providing to college students, to successful college students, to say, hey, here's a viable profession where, even though you may go into debt, here's something here's a profession that's going to actually bring you out of that within a reasonable time. And I know for me, when I first started, that did not match up at all. Maybe it's because I graduated college during a recession, but it was very tough for me to support myself as a new teacher, especially in a city like Los Angeles. And I could see that we lost a lot of great people, that came out of my teaching cohort for my university, who decided, this is just not a profession I could see myself going into because I just can't support myself. So I think that's something we need to really consider, and policymakers need to consider. Not to say necessarily we need to raise every single salary, but maybe we need to consider resources that we're putting into teaching programs to recruit teachers, and maybe lowering the cost of what it takes to become a teacher.
So let's talk more about this topic, because we have a new administration coming in, and one of the big platforms of Vice President Kamala Harris, when she was running for president, was around raising teachers' wages. To raise teacher salaries is expensive. In E4E surveys across the country, we have seen teachers say that they are open to performance-based pay, particularly if it's based on multiple measures. They're open to exchanging some of the protections tied into tenure for higher pay. They certainly, like you, Gabe, are saying that teachers are underpaid, and I would definitely agree with that. You also talked about extended school year, so maybe it's about lengthening the school year and increasing pay for more time. I am one that believes teachers are already asked to be martyrs in our society, and we should not ask more of that. We should be paying teachers significantly more. but what are the things that you think should be on the table for increases in teacher pay? Marisa, maybe I'll go to you because I think we just lost Gabe again. But
we just lost Gabe. What are the things I think should be on the table when it comes to teacher pay? Is that what the question was?
Yeah. What do you think we should be talking about to drive up salaries, which I think we all agree would be necessary? But what should there be something that's a trade or in exchange for increasing teacher pay?
Well, so I like the other most expensive idea, which is lowering class sizes, because I actually believe that more people would be attracted to the field of teaching when their environment and when their school environment, when their day is actually even more rewarding and they feel more successful at it, right? Like, I mean, I think I've had a lot of friends leave the teaching profession over the years. I'm 15 years in. And so every year or two, you know, another friend leaves the profession, or another colleague who I thought was a pretty good teacher, like, you know, decides to pursue something else. And I don't know that it is only based on salary. I actually think it is partially based on what you kind of spoke to, which are some of the demands and responsibilities and just like the daily grind of being a teacher. And I think that reducing class sizes actually significantly increases teacher job satisfaction. And I think it might even increase it more than, you know, increasing pay. I don't know, maybe that's a future survey question, but I definitely think that keeping class sizes in check is another way of making sure that job satisfaction is high. So that's one thing I would say, but I do also understand that that is an expensive proposition.
Great. So another question for you, since we're talking a little bit about the presidential transition, obviously we will have a new Secretary of Education, and there's probably been the most polarized relationship in our country's history between Secretary DeVos and teachers unions and teachers and Secretary DeVos in general. So how do you think a shift in new federal leadership will influence the priorities or the tenor or tone of the unions? The unions obviously regularly engaged in sort of back and forth with the Secretary. What do you think will change, and what's the impact of new federal leadership on teachers and teachers unions?
So I think that what has happened is that a lot of solutions have been left up to the states and the local districts and, you know, cities and counties. And I would hope that having a Secretary of Education who just is maybe more knowledgeable about education, or, you know, just has a different perspective, will hopefully really kind of bring some sense of leadership back to the Department of Education. Also, I'm hopeful that maybe like this loaded language and this, like, you know, us versus them kind of mentality is also kind of erased, or at least bridged over, so that way we have more chances to really collaborate on solutions that make sense for schools and students and for communities. You know, I also think that, you know, I know that the Department of Education might actually need to put some money where some money where its mouth is, and actually start to fund some of these programs that we've already talked about, like providing, providing inexpensive Wi-Fi for all families, AirPod fail, but also looking at, you know, things like providing one-to-one technology for students. You know, funding for that could definitely come from the Department of Education. I don't think that we want to necessarily go back to how it was in the past. I think we really want to look at how can we make the Department of Education and the Secretary for Education really like at this place of innovation and place of forward thinking. I don't think we should go back to the last 100 years of education, but I think it's time for a real leader to step in there and to really say, like, you know, here is where we can step in the gap and really like improve education for families across the country. And so I think that the Department of Education could really be a unifying force.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, maybe what we have missed.
So let's say the vitriol comes down at the federal level and the arguing comes down at the federal level. And hopefully we've seen that similar vitriol in Los Angeles over the last few years. If the vitriol comes down, like, what do you think? What are the issues that you want your union to work on with the district? Like, what are the things that would be most valuable to you as teachers if the union and the district came together to really innovate and put in place changes.
So one thing I would really want us to work on, and I know Gabe is going to talk about this too, probably, so I'll just say it really quickly, is more integration of social emotional learning. We've had a lot of kind of chances to look at social emotional learning and to start to try to integrate it into like our homeroom and advisory classes. Also looking at incorporating it even into like our regular content classes as well. And I think that's actually been it's been one of those like side benefits of you know, closing schools and going virtual, is that teachers have really been asked to kind of like dig in and really integrate SEL standards and SEL lessons into their content. And I think that's really great, and that's something that should continue, and I hope we can work together on that. I might say that the other thing I would really like us to look at is continuing to personalize and like personalized schools and personalized instructional strategies, and also like even personalized, you know, just not just across like the grade levels, but also like, you know, looking at communities and looking at schools specifically, and allowing schools and communities to really carefully plan, and giving more leeway and flexibility to those plans. I think that we could continue to do that. And I hope that that is something else that's come out of pandemic that we would continue to build on.
Great. And Gabe, and I will give you space to talk about SEL because I know you're a strong advocate for SEL, but I would love for you to build on what Marisa said, if you could, and just talk a little bit about, like, you know, coming back to schools. The union is traditionally seen as sort of, they fight for wages and benefits, and like traditional bread and butter issues are there for grievances and for legal issues. What else do you want the union to be for teachers in addition to those basic protections?
Well, I'm thinking of two things I want to consider here is, what do our members need and what do our students need? What do our members need is, I feel like it's a time for us to really look inward, and we need professional development around looking inward and really understanding where we come from in our you know, in our development. For example, you know, I grew up as, even though I am a man of color and I grew up in a low-income community, you know, that does not mean that I don't have some kind of privilege. You know, I definitely do have male privilege, and coming to understand that, reckoning with that myself, and knowing how to overcome it and not be controlled by my male privilege has taught me to be has helped me become a better resource for my female students. And to me, that's where I see a great need, because, for example, in the STEM fields, it's not like we don't have you know, young girls who aren't interested. There's definitely, and I see in elementary, many young girls who are interested in the STEM fields, and somewhere along the line, they're just not making it all the way to the profession. Something's going on there, and I feel it's time for us to take a look at that. And I think that's something our union and union leadership should advocate for. But another thing is that social emotional learning. You know, what's something the students need? And I feel like when the pandemic first started, social emotional learning took up about at least 50% of our day and what we were doing with the students, because that's exactly what was needed at that time. And when we come back, we are going to have to be repairing some damage. You're doing some repairing and some growth together as us as professional teachers, and also the students are going to need to come back, and they're going to need that support. And that's something that we're going to have to advocate to make sure resources are there. And so the question I would pose is, where is our sense of urgency and where should it be? And I think it needs to be with, first and foremost, getting our students safely back into schools safely and getting their heads on straight. And you know, speaking colloquially, but I think getting their heads on straight, and I say that in the most well-rounded way, you know, socially, financially, whatever the resources they may need, you know, because this has been a whirlwind for all of us. And if we're not advocating for that as a union, we're not doing our job. I don't feel, and it's time for us to really step up and consider that. That is where our sense of urgency should be directed.
Great. And Gabe, I know we lost you for a minute when Marisa and I were talking a little bit about teacher pay, since we brought that up and you brought that up. What are things that you think, I'll give you a chance to weigh in on this last question. What are things that you think should be on the table as we talk about teacher pay? And then we'll come to Brenda's great question about teacher licensure, which sort of connects a little bit, Marisa, to your comment in the chat. So we'll come back to that. Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to consider definitely the cost of living, because, you know, I could definitely see myself, you know, buying a home and you know, in this part of my life, and it's not really something I could do with my current pay in my current city. And so that's going to be something that's going to come down to regional decision making, but we definitely need federal support, federal and state support for that. You know, I'm not one to say that, actually I am one to say that we definitely need to have competitive wages, and mostly so we could attract the best people to our profession, the best people so we could best serve our students.
Yeah. Great. So let's go to this question around licensure. So Marisa, you talked a little bit about what should be happening in teacher prep programs for teachers to become teachers, how to make it better. What do you think should change in order for teachers to receive their license? Right now, you go through your teacher preparation program, you take your assessments, you show some practicum in the classroom, but what are things that you think should be a part of teachers receiving a license to show that they're ready to be with students?
So I have a couple of ideas around that. I mean, one thing I would say is just making sure that people get in the classroom earlier rather than later, whether that's through observations or like, teaching a lesson with a licensed teacher in the classroom. But I think that what I've had several friends happen to, where they thought they wanted to be a teacher. They went through all of the credential program coursework, and then it's like they start student teaching and they're like, nope, not for me. And so I just think that, the earlier that people are actually like in classrooms and just getting the experience and the feel of what it will be like to be a role carrying teacher, is important. And I think that needs to happen sooner rather than later. So that way people know that, like, if it's not for them, they can get out of it a lot earlier than being like, well, I already spent the money on all of the coursework and I already spent all this time to take all of these classes. So I think that's one thing that would help with licensing teachers, and also with encouraging more teachers to join the profession. If it's something where you have some kind of low stakes entry points to actually test it out or try it out, I think that could be a win for both of those. Also, I recommend fast track programs. I was actually a fast track program teacher myself. And I think that there needs to be a balance between something where it's like, I know Teach for America, you only have like a few weeks of training. And of course, in most credential programs, you have like 18 months to 2 years. I think something in the middle of that, where, you could get your credential in a year with student teaching, like as part of that, or in, 9 months to a year or something. So I think that having a fast track program where a person could become pretty much fully licensed within a year, I think that's reasonable. And I think that would also encourage more people to join the profession. The other thing I would say is that I think people need more than 1 year or than, 15 or 16 months to show that they can be a teacher. I know in California right now, we kind of have this process with permanent status, where teachers actually, like a year and a half, it's by March 12th or March 15th or something like that. Basically, you have to be offered a contract, or else like you're going to basically be let go as a teacher. This is when you first start out. This is within the first 15 months of teaching. And I actually think that that's like pretty much baloney, because if somebody had come into my classroom a year and a half into my teaching, I mean, I was good. I was okay. I was good, but I was probably not great, right? A year and a half into something. We don't expect anyone to be amazing at what they do a year, or even solid and steady at what they do a year and a half into it. And I just think that's just a ridiculous expectation. We need to have more chances for people to really like self-reflect, evaluate their teaching abilities, and then have time to correct and fix. And then, come back and say, okay, in the last 6 months, you've done so much work. We think you're going to be, a great teacher. You are a good teacher. I think it's just also giving people multiple chances to correct and to self-evaluate and reflect. That would help.
That really resonates with me as somebody that felt similarly, that in my first year or two, I had a lot of learning under my belt in the classroom. And to guarantee tenure and permanent status at that point, or to force principals to make that decision to say either you can't be a teacher or you're earning permanent status that quickly is, there's got to be other ways, right? Like multiple pathways, just like we want for our students. So Gabe, I'm going to push this next question in the chat to you because I know we only have a few more minutes. What type of professional development do you think teachers find the most value in or most beneficial to their work? And you can either take that like right now in the pandemic, what do teachers need to improve distance learning, and or what do teachers need in general outside of the pandemic?
I think, within and without the pandemic, it's really, I feel like we need to be able to collaborate with each other, because I feel like, especially when I was in my cohort for my education program and becoming a teacher, it's really the experiences that we shared with each other, the understandings that we shared with each other that got me through and really helped me understand what I needed to do to become a better teacher. Also, observing veteran teachers. That's one thing that definitely helped me out a lot. My first couple of years of teaching, I had the opportunity to co-teach with several veteran teachers, and they were invaluable to me. And I feel, because that's one thing we don't want as teachers. We don't want to waste our time. We don't want to go to professional developments that aren't really helpful or don't really hit the nail on the head to give us exactly what we need. And it can be tough coming up with good professional development, but we don't want to waste our time. And when we spend more time with each other as educators, with our veteran teachers as mentors, and with our cohorts as collaborators, I feel that's where we have the most opportunity for growth. And I think we need to consider that. And that's something where, like I said, it's tough after just a year and a half to really say, as Marisa said, to say this person is ready or not. And that's a tough position for both the young teacher, the new teacher, and the administrators to be in. And it's not fair to anyone all around. So I really do agree with what you said about having multiple pathways. And so, all in all, where we're able to be there and collaborate and mentor each other is what I feel we really need in our teacher development programs.
Yeah. Well, we have about a minute left here. And so I want to ask, to close us out, both of you ran for union leadership. What's one thing that you think would be fundamentally different if you were the president and vice president of UTLA? What's one thing that you'd be different, either for students or for teachers?
I would say for teachers, it would be the level of outreach to our membership. And for students, it would be a stronger focus on their needs.
And Marisa, do you want to close?
Yeah, I think that we give, I think to build off of what Gabe said, we give time and energy to what we think is most important. And the number one thing that our union should be giving time and energy towards is how to improve outcomes for students and families and schools within Los Angeles. And so I think that should be what we're spending, 70, 80, 90% of our time on. That's what our motions should be on in the House of Reps for UTLA. That's what our board of directors should be sending out, information about. I mean, I think that should just really be the focus. I also think that, one more time, it decided to do it one more time. I also think that, doing more grassroots listening would be really impactful for our union. Really, like going to schools and really listening and asking and wanting to know responses would be something that would also change our union for the better.
Great. Well, I can't think of a better note to leave us on than that. So I just want to thank you both for the work that you do in your classrooms, for your bravery on pushing your union to be more student-centered. I know stepping out the classroom was a big risk for you, and it takes a lot to challenge people in power. So thank you for your leadership in and outside the classroom, and for joining us today.